Hello everyone, this is Lady on the Violin, and today I celebrate my first year of learning the violin. This first year of learning has been completely shared by my very first owned violin, which is this one, the Benjamin Adams VN75 student model. It is one of the least expensive violins you can purchase from the Mach music stores, and it is a total of $80, and with that you get the violin, you get a bow, and you get a light rosin. The violin itself is pretty decent. It's a nice red color, and it has a good finish that allows you to easily clean the violin, and it's actually pretty decent. I used this violin to start up my learning, and it has gone through many transformations. I can't say I haven't learned enough from this little violin. And if you want to hear examples of how this sounds in the hands of a beginner, please visit my play-along videos that I will link in the description box below. One pro to point out is its very inexpensive price. Now, the only thing, since you're not buying it off a violin shop, I actually went to Mach and bought it direct from them. You have to set it up yourself. So all you have to do is prop up the bridge, tune the strings, and apply a lot of rosin to the brand new bow. And after doing all that, the violin will be absolutely ready to play, and it will have a very decent sound. For a beginner like myself, it was a really good start. But with time, as I played it more and more, I noticed a total of 5 issues that I had to address in order to make this violin very playable. The first issue I encountered with this violin is that the tuning pegs are not fitted correctly. So when you tune this violin for the very first time, you are going to need a lot of patience and possibly peg drops. I did get my hands on some peg drops, and I applied it to each and every peg, and with that the strings stayed in tune much longer. I didn't get the unraveling effect anymore, and all I had to do was fine-tune the strings every time I played. Now, the downside of using peg drops is that the pegs become very hard to turn, and one thing you do not want to do is force turn the pegs. You run the risk of breaking the pegs and breaking the scroll, and which is something that happened to me on another violin that I bought used from Craigslist for $25. I did the same thing. I was having a hard time tuning it, and the peg broke, which is too bad. But I did learn my lesson, so I will never force turn my pegs ever again. Fortunately, it didn't happen to this one. But also, most likely, I will never use peg drops ever again as well. Now, after that incident, I did do plenty of research to find out why the pegs were giving me so much trouble. And that's when I found out that the pegs are usually not properly fitted for violins that are factory made and not direct from a violin shop. So I went ahead and fitted the pegs myself. I sanded down each peg so that it's flush to the other side of the scroll, and I also found this great product called Peg Compound. It's the best of both worlds. It allows the pegs to turn smoothly, and at the same time it doesn't allow the pegs to unravel. And with that small adjustment, I am able to tune the violin very easily using the pegs, and it stays in tune. All I have to do is use the fine tuners to get each string perfectly in pitch, and if I may be picky, I've noticed that the E string tuning knob has always been difficult to turn. But I'm not sure if that would apply to all of the models, or maybe it's just this violin. But yes, so that was my first issue, the unfitted pegs. Now my second issue that I encountered with this violin is that the tailpiece fastener broke. And the way I found out was after a few, I think a couple of months of use, every time I started playing, I would hear a big click or a snap, and all of the strings would detune. Then I would spend a lot of time retuning it. I would play again, and I would hear that snap, and all of the strings would detune again. I noticed that the sound always came from the tailpiece. So I carefully disassembled it, and I found out that the tailpiece fastener, which is this piece right here that goes around the end button and attaches to the tailpiece, it has threads, and those threads were completely stripped. Now, it could be a result of cheap parts, because since this is a budget violin, I'm sure they used cheap parts to cut down costs. So I had to put my practice on pause and look for a very good fastener. And if you get a really good fastener and replace it yourself, it's only going to cost you about $5. If you take it to your luthier, they can replace it and tune the violin and set it up for about $15. Issue number 3. The strings that came with this violin were not very good. So I went ahead and replaced the strings as well. I got a good set of decent strings. They're very easy to change out. And once you change out your strings, you're going to have a better sounding violin. Again, the cheap strings are a result of just using cheaper parts for a budget violin. That's what you're going to get. So just go ahead, if you do purchase this violin, change out the strings. Don't even try using the strings it comes with, and you will have a pretty decent sounding violin. So this brings me to issue number 4, which is one of the most significant issues I've encountered with this violin. And it is that the strings sit too high above the fingerboard, which is this part right here. This affects playability. Every time I would start to play the violin, my fingertips would get really hurt, and it felt like my fingertips were going through egg slicers. It was pretty bad, and I could not play longer than about 15 minutes without feeling a lot of pain on my fingertips, no matter how much pressure I would apply to the strings. And around that time that I was noticing this issue, I also bought a used violin, very cheap, at $25 from Craigslist, and I noticed that violin was much easier on my fingers, and I was able to play that one for more than an hour without feeling any pain on my fingertips. Now I understand that when you start playing stringed instruments, you will start to develop calluses on your fingertips, but this was way beyond calluses. This was very painful. So when I compared the Benjamin Adams violin with my used violin, I noticed there were 2 differences. The nut on this violin was much higher than the used violin, and this fingerboard part was much closer to the body of the violin. It sat lower than my used violin. So I went ahead and did some research, and I found out that the fingerboard at this area right here, from the belly of the violin up to the top of the fingerboard, it's supposed to measure from 20 to 21 millimeters high. This is only 17 millimeters high, and it makes a huge difference. where it hurts when you play here, and when you play third position, it is virtually impossible. You have to force the strings down. And the way I addressed this issue, two ways. First of all, I went ahead and sanded down the nut so that it sits lower, and probably I just made sure that a very thick business card was able to slide in between the strings and the fingerboard here. So that's how much I sanded the nut carefully. And then I also adjusted the bridge to accommodate the low fingerboard. And I lowered the bridge as much as I could. I was able to lower it about 2 millimeters lower than it originally was, and it made a huge difference. Now I'm able to play for over an hour without feeling pain on my fingertips. I no longer feel pain on my fingertips with this adjustment, and it made this violin very playable. So yes, beware if you buy a cheap violin like this one, make sure that the fingerboard sits at a height between 20 to 21 millimeters, and make sure that the nut is low enough so that when you are in first position, it's not painful to play. Now, issue number 5, and this is the last issue that I found with this violin. It doesn't affect playability, it doesn't affect sound, but it affects the look of the violin. And it's the fact, again, it's a low budget violin, therefore the extra wooden parts are not made out of ebony wood, which means when you play for a very long time, you will get black dye on your fingertips. Also, when you clean, you're going to get black dye on your cleaning rag when you clean the fingerboard. When I sanded down the pegs and when I sanded down the nut, the real wood color came out, and it's a wood color, it's not black. So I had to re-dye the nut, and the pegs, I just left them as they were because it's not very noticeable. The parts that I sanded down are behind the scroll, so it's not very noticeable that the true wood color is coming out. And the reason why it's important is because you don't want to get dyes on your fingers every time you play, and you don't want to mark up your fingerboard. After 1 year of use, I have 2 permanent marks on my fingerboard that reveal the true wood color of the fingerboard. And I kind of gave up in always concealing it with furniture paint or furniture pencil, because the paint will always come out every time you use it. So beware of that. Make sure that when you get a violin, it uses ebony parts so that it's easier to clean, and when you play, you don't get the dyes on your fingers. And if you make adjustments, you don't have to repaint the parts to be black again. Would I recommend this violin to every beginner? Not at all. If you're someone that just wants to take up the violin and not have to deal with any issues, this is far from ideal. I was prepared to tear this violin down piece by piece if I had to. And I didn't feel any remorse in taking it apart and modifying it myself. It gave me a hands-on experience of what makes a very good violin without the risk of destroying a very expensive investment. So for a beginner that likes taking things apart and putting them back together and not minding the interruptions of practice throughout owning a violin, this violin is actually pretty ideal, because after all the adjustments, this violin is actually really decent sounding. I actually like the sound. It probably doesn't have much character. I don't know what that means yet, because I don't feel that I have enough experience playing different violins to determine what character is, but for me it sounds pretty good. It doesn't have a nasally sound when you play it. It actually plays very clear, and it sounds pretty good if you know how to play correctly. In my opinion, I think the ideal way to buy your very first violin is to go to an actual violin shop and have the luthier there or whoever's working there play the different models that fit your budget. Follow their advice and see what's out there. When you buy a violin from a violin shop, at minimum, you will receive a violin that is set up and ready to play, and it will be very playable. It will not have the issues I've encountered with this model, and it will be something that you can possibly grow with for the next 3 years. So overall, my rating for this violin is 3 out of 5 stars. For a beginner like myself, I would say 4 out of 5 stars. And the way, with all my adjustments, I would say 5 out of 5 stars for a beginner. Basing it off of when you initially have it without any adjustments, it's probably a 3-star violin. You're going to have issues. And this is my 5-star beginner violin now, after all those adjustments, and after switching out some of the accessories. I actually love playing this violin, but I am ready to explore new options, and hopefully I'll find my ideal violin in the next coming year. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below. Hit the like or subscribe button to see more videos like this one. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.